will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Today, I'd like to share with you some thoughts that I've had on communication as a student of engineering, of philosophy, and of neurosurgery. When I was growing up, this is what I thought of communication: a great speaker in front of a crowd of thousands. In graduate school, I got started studying the brain and the communication between individual cells in the brain. And I came to realize that communication exists at many levels. One level is the sound of spiking in individual cells as they relate information from one region in the brain to the other. As a neurosurgeon, I have the opportunity to listen to this music in patients during surgeries when they're awake and being tested. I wanted to share a little of that with you. This is the sound of the subthalamic nucleus. It sounds like raindrops on a roof. The subthalamic nucleus helps us engage in our movements. It helps us control what we do. Its neighbor speaks a very different language. It's smoother. This is the substantia nigra. The substantia nigra communicates to the subthalamic nucleus through a series of indirect pathways and eventually controls how it works. So the brain exists as neurons. These neurons come together to form circuits, and the circuits eventually form the entire nervous system. This gives rise to all of our experiences. It gives rise to our actions. It gives rise to our sensations. In fact, it gives rise to consciousness itself. But as we all know, communication can break down. In countries, communication breakdowns lead to wars. In couples, arguments. And in the brain, communication breakdowns lead to neurologic disease. As a functional neurosurgeon, I help patients who have problems with communication in their brain. The function of their brain, not the structure of their brain, is disordered. And I wanted to share a little of that with you. This is Tom. He's a patient of mine, and he has Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a problem in which the dopamine chemical that's in the substantia nigra disappears. And the circuits eventually controlling the subthalamic nucleus, the two characters that we had been hearing earlier in the talk, become disordered. Parkinson's disease is characterized by three symptoms: tremor, rigidity, and bradykinesia. Let's see how the disordered communication in Tom's circuits affect him. As you can see, Tom has tremor-predominant Parkinson's disease. He wants to move smoothly, but his hands involuntarily move from side to side. What can we do for patients like Tom? Fortunately, there's an engineering solution. It's called deep brain stimulation, and it's shown on the right. A deep brain stimulator is a brain pacemaker. It's a box that's implanted in the chest with a wire that goes deep into the brain to a specific location that depends on the patient's disease. The deep brain stimulator produces a tone, the same way that neurons do. This is the sound of a deep brain stimulator. I think of it like the oboe that begins a concert. Before the oboe starts to play, everyone's doing their own thing. It sounds like a lot of noise. But the oboe comes in, and soon everyone's playing together. The neurons are acting in concert, and the tremor goes away. The surgery is very involved. We have to precisely place the electrode into a target the size of a pea lying deep in the middle of the brain. There's a reason it's called deep brain stimulation. So let's see, how does deep brain stimulation affect Tom? Here he is with the stimulator turned on. You can imagine how gratifying it is as the patient and as the physician to take care of patients like these. But I have to share with you that the greatest challenge in my career as a professional is not doing complex brain surgeries. It's overcoming a communication gap. In the state of Michigan, there are 30,000 patients with Parkinson's disease. And perhaps 10,000 of these would benefit, like Tom did, from deep brain stimulation. However, they either don't know that they have their disease, or they don't know that deep brain stimulation exists. And therefore, only 7% of them are treated. There's an even more common movement disorder called essential tremor. And there are 200,000 patients in the state of Michigan with that disorder. In this group, the numbers are even worse. Only 1% of the patients who would potentially benefit from DBS have had the surgery. It's bridging this communication gap that is the focus of my professional career. So we've talked about communication in language, motor, there's sensation. But in my life as a whole, there's a communication problem that exists in the brain and that we all share that causes us a lot of challenge. And that's our self-talk. Each of us shares our lives with an intrusive and talkative companion. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's that voice in your head that's right now saying, "What's he talking about?" Self-talk is that voice that we're always hearing. It's universal. We all have it. It's ongoing. It never shuts up. It's influential. Unlike our buddy sitting next to us, when it forms an opinion and hands it to us, we accept it readily as our gut feeling without critical thought. And it's unstable. Self-talk isn't interested in forming the correct conclusion. Self-talk is interested in being comfortable. It wants to be settled. And if it has to make assumptions that are incorrect to reach that feeling of contentment, it does. This is self-talk. We're going to ask someone out. She likes me. She doesn't. I want to buy something at the store. This is good. This is bad. You're driving to park before giving a talk, and there's someone going slow. This person's out to get me. No, this person is just trying to park just like me. Our lives are full of interpretation. We're always in situations. We assess what these situations mean, and we form conclusions based on them. Self-talk plays an important role in this process by forming the beliefs that affect that assessment. Self-talk tells us whether this is a cup half full or a cup half empty. I remember when I was a resident and I had been on call and it was pretty late in the day, I boarded a flight. As the airplane took off, there was a baby that started to cry. I was pretty cranky. And I sat there thinking, why can't anyone do it? It was the self-talk talking in my head. Well, a couple of days ago, I was on another flight, and another baby started to cry. And I looked at that baby, and I heard a voice saying, "Wow, what a cute kid. I'm sorry it's uncomfortable. And boy, I feel sorry for those parents." Well, what had happened in the intervening period was that my brothers had had children. I had nieces and nephews. I knew what was going on. It was the same situation, but my self-talk had changed, and my interpretation and my understanding of what was going on had changed as well. Self-talk affects our happiness. The positive psychologists talk about something called flow. What is flow? Flow is when we're playing tennis. It's when we're doing surgery. It's when we're engaged in a goal-oriented activity. It's when our perceived skills match the perceived challenges of the situation. It's when we have this clear and immediate feedback. Well, Our self-talk influences each of these. It tells us, hey, this is a really great goal-oriented activity, or it says, hey, this is really a waste of time. It says, oh, I'm up to this situation, or it says, no, I'm not. It says, I'm doing well. It says, this is not working at all. When I was a student of philosophy, I got really interested in how the mind might work. And I see self-talk affecting the way the mind works as well. There are two sides to our minds. As an engineer and as a neurosurgeon, I use the analytic side of my mind a lot. The analytic side is the one that takes a bunch of data and forms a conclusion. The philosopher in me likes the intuitive side. It gathers incomplete information and goes on its gut. What does self-talk do to this process? Self-talk tries to move our intuitive way of thinking to an analytic way of thinking. We form conclusions, we form assumptions, because we want to have certainty. We want to be able to analyze. And this is what self-talk does. So how do we work on our self-talk? How do we work with it? Well, the first thing I think to understand is that we can't control the way we think. So, I think there are 3 steps. The first is awareness. If we know that we have self-talk, if we're aware of its character, then that's helpful. The second is having some insight. We know that self-talk tries to form conclusions even when information is incomplete. We know that self-talk affects our assessment of a situation. And finally, there are internal things that we can do. For me, I'm interested in meditation. Meditation allows me to focus on my breath and understand how my thoughts are moving, how my self-talk is occurring. Each of us might find our own way to address our understanding of self-talk and to understand what it's saying. So you might wonder, do these 2 worlds ever come together? And actually they do. It's in the world of depression. Depression is a terrible disease. It's a disease in which our self-talk itself is diseased. You win the lottery, and with depression, you're worried about the taxes that you're going to have to pay. You have a child, and you're worried about college tuitions. It's a terrible, terrible disease. But amazingly enough, through the insights of functional neuroimaging, we have some ways of treating depression. On the left, you can see an area called the cingulate area 25 that burns red hot when patients have depression. It turns out that if one places a deep brain stimulator in this region, it cools down. The patient has a more positive outlook on life. This is something that we're still studying. We're not 100% sure that it works, but it has promise for using a deep brain stimulator to control self-talk. And so in conclusion, there are many different forms of communication in the brain. There are some that are obvious, there are some that are not obvious. I hope that some of the ideas and insights that I've been able to provide today will help each of us achieve greater contentment through better understanding of our self-talk. Thank you.